10 o'clock, so we might as well make a start. So welcome to Exceptional FS Business Sunday, and today we're going to talk about how to effectively implement lasting change, and we're going to be covering the topics of the difference between practice and reality, the critical steps that you need to take, and how to get people to be on your side, and also how to break down the barriers that prevent change. So welcome everybody, and exciting times that we have now here with COVID-19, and obviously there is a lot of change happening at the moment with businesses transitioning from certainly restaurants are transitioning to takeaway meals. There's been change in how fitness is done, with especially in Australia with only one-on-one working, but businesses are adapting to that as well. So from your perspective, do you want to share some of your experiences, what you've seen in today's environment?
Sure. I mean, it's, as you said, Damian, the changes are endless. Talking amongst family and friends, just the basic changes that we're all witnessing as consumers, but to jump into the shoes of the people on the other side who either have to implement those changes or create ways to make the changes can be very simple or very confusing. I think that's the real challenge of working out what the changes are, and secondly implementing them, and then having the mindset and the willpower to go and do it. I saw in the news last night, one of my clients is involved in the alcohol industry, but she was explaining to me a couple of weeks ago how kegs just don't last and the breweries are taking them back, but some of the craft breweries can't send them back because they make them, and they're actually tapping the kegs, putting them into cans, and offering a home delivery service of selling alcohol online. So they've got their steel cans, they've got a canning machine, they've got special approval to do that. So, that's a change from a pub to offer something like that, but they've had to figure out how to put the stuff in the can it, and create a website so it can be sold online and market it. So there's quite a few changes just in that one instance there.
So from that perspective, is it... Oh, go ahead, Ingrid.
Well, so I was just going to say too, that the whole environment, the communication around the changes that are happening, it can either provide a level of certainty or remove it. And so there's a whole, each industry has a compliance framework. They can't break that. They can't make choices that break that, regardless of the other information that's coming in. So people are having to filter through and sort out what's possible. And obviously, depending on what industry you're in, that can be extremely complex.
Yeah, I found it a little bit difficult with, well, not difficult, a little bit of a challenge that with a lot of my programs and stuff that I do offer are very face-to-face, and I pick up on people's energy and their moods and all that sort of stuff, and I have to take that extra step back now and try and work that out from a little hole in the top of the computer and what I see. So it is changing, but I have to adapt with that. So a lot of the programs I run in schools, I've got a meeting 12 o'clock Monday because the schools still need me. They want to get me in front of the faces of the kids. And yeah, so that's going to be new and evolving and exciting, I think, from my perspective.
Yeah, fantastic. And so some of that change as well, when we talk about how do we manage change and how do we deal with that, there's obviously a lot of change management theories out there. From that perspective too, how do you find, from my perspective, I found that when I deal a lot with change with companies and implementing change, and I work, some of my clients are in the sectors of manufacturing where they've got a lot of labourers and those kind of people, which generally are not the most receptive to change. And certainly I found in that environment, if you start talking about change management theory, you lose them. They get really lost. They just don't connect with that. But if you keep it practical as to this is how you do that, or how it's going to be of benefit to you, I found was one of the biggest things, showing them that there will be an uncomfortable period, and in that uncomfortable period, usually we find that there's a lot of complaints. So I address that by saying, well, what this period is about is you telling me what is going to work and what doesn't work, so we can then use that to go forward. And I found having that more practical approach, speaking their language, is more effective in getting that change implemented than if I start talking about theories and change management theory. Have you guys experienced anything similar to that, or what have your experience been in implementing those type of changes?
Yeah, I've come across companies before, ones I've run and consulted with, and it's a balance of not lecturing to them, but going down to connecting with them on their level. So depending on the type of change and the time frames and what the actual changes are, and as you said, if you're working with, say, factory workers or manufacturers, they're going to have a different attitude towards making changes with Deloitte partners. So it's how you connect with those people and communicate with them. So as I say, in most things in life, if you can put yourself in the other person's shoes, you're 3/4 of the way there of achieving change or what you want to get done. So that's really important of, as I say, not preaching to them and lecturing to them, but connecting with them on their level. And then it's amazing how you can, move forward with what you want to get done.
It's interesting, isn't it? Because collaboration is key. And that sounds very simplistic, but effective change actually requires a shared will and a shared intention. And so if you don't look after those two aspects and really foster them in open communication, transparent communication, then you get rejection and you get barriers very quickly. And in fact, every capability has lots of tools and techniques, whether you're a program or a project manager, whether you're a business analyst, like my background, or, change. We all have tools and techniques, but if we cannot adapt them, if we cannot listen, they're a bit empty and meaningless. And I think there's so much change at this time, we have to stop and listen more, even more.
But is listening sort of something that you say is really important? So go ahead, Pete.
It's one of the hardest things to do is listen. Most of the time, after about 5 words, people are trying to conjure up what they're going to respond to or open up with, rather than actually listen to what the people are talking about. So yeah, that connection, that bonding, accepting of characters is really, really important.
That's a very good point you raised there, Pete. And that's what I was going to ask, is from that perspective of listening. That is really difficult for a number of people, I found, to do, and myself as well. It's a lot of times you're listening to that and then you're thinking about what's the next thing to say. But when you actually step back and can train yourself to step back and say, hey, to really take on board what they're saying, you uncover a whole bunch of new connections with that person, and also to the ability to work with them. So,
and often you're breaking. Oh, sorry.
No, go ahead, Ingrid.
Often you're breaking down preconceived understandings of what these different frameworks can do and how they can be implemented. And so sometimes you're even just unpicking what other people think your interactions are going to be with them before you can make a step forward in a constructive and really formative, positive direction.
So go ahead.
I was just going to say quickly, the other thing, and we're talking about change today in this environment, and change in what I call normal times. And in call it normal times, there is a lot of planning and discussions and implementing ways that can be changed. And if you can compare that to change today, which is called, you could almost classify it as survival change, where there is no time. It's do this or go home. So it's kind of like the fight or flight sort of mode, where businesses have to change rapidly or they don't survive. So, and it's amazing how what I'm seeing, people are coming together and accepting those changes, where if they were suggested, 3 or 4 months ago, they wouldn't have happened and they would have laughed at you. So I guess there's two types of changes. There's today's change and call it normal change.
Is that something you found where, like, I mean, I noticed a lot of businesses today, the change has been forced on them, that they just have to do that. And I mean, is that something where finding the motivation to change, obviously in right today we have to change, and they either do that or they don't survive. Is it the case where, you know, in a different environment where people are not really motivated to change, is that a key factor, is finding that motivation to change from your client's perspective?
Doesn't everyone love routine? We love the routine, we love the normal, and half the times we are changing daily and not even knowing it. And we look back after 6 months and go, wow, this is what I was doing, now this is what I am doing. So you're right, Julian, before there's that blinded change, but sometimes there has to be that leader that says, hey, this is how we're doing it now, and it's just the way it's got to be. And I was only talking to my wife last night about when things go back to the new normal, how much are we actually going to appreciate the things that we could do before, but then in amount of time, how much are we going to then take that as for granted again? Humans, we're funny creatures.
Yeah, what's the new normal?
Yeah.
So from that perspective, so Ingrid?
I was just going to say that, you know, it's a factor of change resilience. You know, we're all human, and but we all have very different capacities for change. You know, we're all change agents, and we find it perhaps more acceptable and more tolerable, and yet we're still filtering out and seeing masses of destruction and pain and suffering at the moment. And, you know, what does that do to potentially suppress good decision making, suppress that will and that resilience as well. And I think many people, if they come from it at as an individual, a questioning of self and how they're dealing with it now, there'll be great variation in that capacity to actually be resilient for a short term or medium or long term.
So from a perspective of the critical steps that we need to implement change, and one of them we talked about earlier was listening, and that is probably one of the first steps you need to do, is listen to what the audience is. I mean, I would think one of the others I've found really important is finding how to motivate the people to want to change. And a simple one, coming back to my example with the factory workers, that we went from, my client had to go from, they had an old paper timekeeping system, so they were, the employees were filling out a time card on something that you'd expect back from the 1940s, and they're handwriting on that. They would then submit that at the end of the week, and that would get processed. So they were moving from that to a fully electronic system with an app on everybody's phone that they could then submit their timesheet. And what I noticed was when we were I was teaching, explaining to the employees how they were going to go about using this system. And I started with knowing that they were factory workers, and we all have, not just factory workers, but we all have an ego. And so what I started with, I said, well, this is going to be really, you know, I understand this is going to be scary and challenging. And I could immediately see half of them in the room sat up straighter, as if to say, don't tell me I'm going to be scared by this. And it grabbed their attention. So that really helped with that motivation. So from that perspective, you know, looking at what are the critical steps to implementing change, one is, as we talked about, is listening. The other is finding the right ways to motivate them. What other factors have you found that have helped being a critical step to implementing change?
Showing that you care. Well, I'm going to say humans are humans. You can't bullshit a bullshitter. When you're trying to deliver something, and you don't believe in it yourself, you don't care. 99% of the others who are listening can pick up on that. The biggest thing that I work on is having that connection, actually letting the other person or room of people feel that I actually do care about what I'm invested in, what I'm doing, and about what is about for them. So caring for me, letting them know that it's real, that I do care, and we, not I, but we want this outcome. So it's team manufactured as well. But yeah, underlying that word caring, very important to me.
It's interesting that the use of word that you've got there, or the words you say we as opposed to me. I mean, is that, how do you find that plays into it from your perspective, Pete? And
well, it's a collective. It's a collective, isn't it? If I told you to do this, and if you don't do that, then you get in trouble from me, rather than using the words, hey, this is what we've got to do, and if we don't, we're going to fail, but I've got the answers to get us across the line. So it's that collective use of words.
It's team success, isn't it? And it's building trust, and it's building enrollment in the change early on, not just about throwing something over the fence and expecting it to work without any compassion, without any support, without any proper discussion. So if you are truly discussing what a change is and what impacts it may or may not have on somebody very early, they're far more accepted. In fact, as a team, people tend to, as you say, be less likely to put the brakes on and jerk. Actually, you've taken me on this trip. You've gone from here to here. This is why we've done it. Very simplistically speaking, we're on that point of going live or implementing. We'll just do it, and it's because they've been engaged and properly informed.
Julian, we've got listening, finding motivation, showing that you care and that you believe in what you're implementing, focusing on the team success and building trust. How would you add to that?
I think the other thing that is, I think the we is really, really important. It's, as I said, you're not pointing, you're not lecturing, you're not got to stick out threatening people, because as we know, that's going to, get people's backs up. The we is important, but then also looking at what the end result is. What's the benefit? If people are doing something this way and you want them to go here, and as we're all humans and we're creatures of comfort and habit, is to try and portray, when we do this, this is where we're going to be. Like, why are we changing? What's the benefit? I do this 9 till 5, I do it this way, but here's the ultimate benefit. And that's sort of, I guess, a selling proposition as well. And I can relate it back many years ago when we put in a company I was running, we put in a global company, we had to put in goes back to the Y2K. So we had to put in a new software system, and the question was why. The software system we have works really well. We had Deloitte's in there crawling all over the joint. But the point was, especially when you do software integration, that can be a real pain, because you're taking people out of their current roles, and they have to sort of wear two hats for 3 to 6 months to implement the new software, and it's going to have headaches. And there's no perfect software rollout. I mean, it's just the nature of the beast. But the benefits of saying, when we do this, we're going to go from here to here, and I think that's very important, of people understanding why the change and what's the benefit.
Ingrid, you said before about trust. That's a huge thing. I think also goes hand in hand with the caring. A lot of the people I work with, I have to internally change them. So we can't see the factory or the physical implementation, and that's where it's a little bit different with me, because I suppose it's in the same as workers, because emotionally they're just not mentally and physically changing. They have to change emotionally as well. So, with my work, the people I've got to talk to and get them to believe within themselves of have seen that change internally, and which can potentially open up other triggers, cans of worms, which now is making me think it's the same in workplaces. It's just not a mental and a physical change, it's an emotional change as well. And tapping in on that and letting them know that you do get that, I think that's a big step forward.
And absolutely, and inspiring one person is an amazing feat, complete respect. Inspiring a whole workforce around cultural change and impact, and where you have a large-scale implementation around, say, software integration, massive government policy being implemented, you're dealing with everything from, senior executives right down to the people, the workforce that are actually being impacted by the change. And if you disrespect any component of the possible impact on any one person at any time, or you take for granted that only one person can actually topple that implementation, if you take that for granted and don't keep a very broad eye on the whole end-to-end, wow, there can be massive derailment. So cultural change, you can actually have you can spend months, weeks, years in the process of implementing large-scale, government to citizen measures, things that are happening now within days would never have happened in our cultural norm in Australia, for example, and found to be acceptable 6 months ago. So, and some things are happening that we're also seeing still a lot of rejection on, and so that's around privacy. So, for example, I'll just touch on an aspect of poor change and poor communication that happened around the Trace app. There's going to be lots and lots of benefits to doing this, but because it wasn't done transparently and explained properly from a health perspective about what we were trying to achieve, now the government's having to pull back and go, we can't, it's not going to be mandatory, we're going to look after your privacy, we're going to look after your data. If they'd gone on the front foot and actually explained all of the things to the public and said, yes, we understand, we are requesting a different level of privacy from you, I just wonder how much more adaptive and responsive the citizens would have been around, the Australian public would have been around that adoption. So, you take one factor and disrespect it, and things go out the window really quickly.
Yeah, that's a really good point. That you can have 100 pieces there, and if 2 of them fall over, the other 96 or 94 will fall like dominoes. And you've got to be quite particular on. It's a really good point. And I just read the headline this morning. I didn't read the article. MPs are pushing back on that app as well now. So you can see the chain reaction of how this thing could be very beneficial, but obviously people will have privacy concerns. But if it's not explained, which it hasn't been crystal clear to what I call the punter in the street, they will just start to step back. And they call it the pub test, do people understand? And this comes back to that level of communication, getting down to people's levels and addressing every single, as much as possible, their concerns in the whole process.
Action and reaction.
With implementing change, from that perspective, from what I've experienced is I work on getting some key people involved and getting their buy-in. An example of that was when Westpac was moving to a new head office in Melbourne. Their whole operating system of how that building was going to operate was completely different to how their previous building was. And what they did was they set up a floor, a separate floor in a different building as to how that new office was going to operate, and they took key people from the main office to this sample office, and they had those people work in that environment for a couple of months and get to know how those systems worked, how it was to operate, and basically to really embrace what that was like. And then those people went back to the original office, and then they started talking about how wonderful this new system was. And I think this is called, the first follower principle. It's not so much you coming up with the change; it's getting that buy-in from those critical people. And I've found with the clients that I work with is finding those key people. And a lot of the times, it's not some of the leaders. It's actually, and in one particular organisation, the key motivator was actually the labourer that ran around and did all the transport and stuff like that. But he was the one that everyone rallied in. And when I got his buy-in, all of a sudden everyone else was following through. So from that implementation perspective, how important is it to find those key people, and what are some other critical aspects that you've found that helped implement change more smoothly?
Well, it's like
it takes a village to grow a child, doesn't it? So you've got to look outside the norm, as you said. The top managers aren't always the ones who are going to drive. It's those people that have got that natural leadership and inner drive to want their stuff to succeed if they're shown the right way. So it comes down to good leadership, I think.
I think there are many strategies that can be implemented, and something that I do all the time is it's called a stakeholder engagement discovery. You're actually mapping out and having conversations with every part of the business, with all the players, with all your external partners, to see and really gauge what the impact of your change or your company's change or the business change is going to be at every different layer, and in the hope that you do actually discover those key, very, very key people who will be your advocates at every different level. I think what we're seeing now, and what I would challenge the team to consider at the moment, is we're not in normal times, and there's no right now I sense that time's slowed down a little bit, and perhaps there's a little bit more time to strategize. But a couple of weeks ago, if you look at the change window and look what was going on around in the world, it is, but particularly in Australia, it was much faster, and people weren't able to stop, plan, think, reassess as well. And I think I would say that every time that we get a sense of slowing down, just a small slowdown, we should really optimize our thinking time and our gather our energy and thoughts and regroup and reassess at that time very carefully.
Definitely. And I think, if we're talking about, today's changes is having the different scenarios almost that, if you look at some of the larger organisations, from government to blue chip companies, how they alter and change. I mean, take Qantas, for instance. Imagine the discussions going on there of the changes of option A, B, C, D. Is international flights going to happen in October or February? Either one of those two timeframes is going to create obviously different options and changes they need to implement. So some of the changes that you may want to do are taken out of your hands by government policy. Back to private enterprise, you're 100% right, Ingrid, where you do have that glimmer of slowdown. I think you're right. We are catching our breath, where we have new way of life for the time being. Now's the time to get those changes discussed and possibly implemented, all as let them go to the stakeholders from the high, middle and low level of all stakeholders, and also get their feedback, because I always believe the feedback from the people that are going to change and their buy-in can make the difference of putting in the wrong policy as well.
Absolutely.
Fantastic. All right. Well, we're just about out of time. So if I can summarise what we've talked about today, in implementing change, we're looking at, some of the key things to do is we really want to listen to what people have been talking about and engage with them on that level. You want to find the right motivations as to what is going to drive them. You want to show that you care about them, and that not only do you care about them, but you also care about the cause and the reasons for change, that you really believe in this change. You want to also focus on the team's success as a whole. Building trust is really critical. So building trust with the people that they believe in you and where you're going with that particular change. And really focus on the end result, the benefit that they're going to get out of it. This example is now, or where you're moving to is actually going to be better for them than where their current situation. And that's the selling point, as you referred to, Julian. And also to identifying who are the key people that are going to, that are the key people that are going to influence other people to help with that change. So that's our program for today, and hopefully that's been very helpful for you, and we look forward to catching up with you all next week. Thank you for participating.
Sounds great.
Thank you.
Thank you.